Peace be upon you, brothers and sisters. This is Said Mirza from ReasonReason.com, and in today's video, I wanted to share a quick update with you. I've finished the third edition of my book, Will You Not Reason. This was a sort of a major overhaul of the book, and I wasn't really pleased with the second edition, so I figured I'd just go ahead and look at the material again and tighten up the arguments and delete some chapters and add some chapters. And now I feel really good about the book, so I decided to release it, and it's available for download on my website. I'll put a link in the drop down box below. And as far as the things that have changed with the book, I'll just give you a quick review of that. So I added a chapter in the proofs and pairs in the Quran, and I think this is one of the most marvelous things about the Quran that God gave me insight into pretty recently, so I wanted to add that in the book. And that's that the Quran talks about, as you know, pairs, that God created everything in pairs. And we see that the sun and the moon, the male and the female, night and day, life and death, these are all pairs. But what's more amazing is that the Quran itself is a paired book. It's paired into two. It's the ambiguous verses on the one side and the unambiguous verses on the other side. And even more marvelous than that is the fact that the Quran's text is replete with mentions of pairs. So once you start noticing that God uses these pairs, constantly throughout the text of the Quran, it will definitely increase your faith. It definitely increased my faith. So I think this is a sign for the believers, and I wanted to share this with you. So I do suggest you read that chapter. Apart from that, there's other proofs and that the Quran points to the existence of the heavens and the earth, and everything obeys the will of God. This was in the previous book as well, so I'm not going to mention too much about that. I added a chapter on the true faith. Now, obviously, our stance is, the Quran alone stance is that the Quran is complete, it's sufficient for guidance, and that the religion of Islam is just something that's been bolted on to the Quran, and it's constructed as a way to divert men from the teachings of God. So then the question arises, okay, so what is the faith in the Quran? And the true faith in the Quran is just monotheism, which is the stand of Abraham, that there is one God, and that he has no partners, and that we are to serve him. So this is the core of the true faith. And so there's a chapter that talks about this true faith in the Quran and the doctrines that are attached to it. I also added a chapter on the Hajj ritual. Now, if you know anything about the religion of Islam, they make a big deal about going to Makkah, Saudi Arabia. Millions of pilgrims go there, and they say that this is the Hajj that was commanded by God, and it was instituted by Prophet Abraham. And so what was needed was a deep dive into this Hajj ritual, this pagan ritual, this idolatry that's going on in there, to see, what correlation does this have with the Quran. And obviously there is no correlation. And this is not a matter of interpretation. This is a fact that the Quran does not contain the many of the details that are done in this Hajj ritual. For example, the circling of the Kaaba is 7 times, which is the highlight of the Hajj ritual. This is not in the Quran. There is no circling of anything in the Quran. There is no running between 2 hills in the Quran. There is no throwing stones at the devil in the Quran. These are all made up inventions and were attached to the true faith. And I think it's conclusive evidence, it's conclusive proof by looking at the arguments in the Quran that whatever is going on in Makkah has nothing to do with the Hajj in the Quran. So that's the chapter I added there. I took out some chapters. I took out the chapters on sujood and ruku and zakat, because I really don't see a point on arguing about the finer details with the religion of Islam. The Quran means what it means by these terms, and you're free to look at the translation of Brother Garens and use your own intelligence to figure out what these words mean and in the context of the Quran. Finally, Salat. Now, this is something that I've been thinking about for a long time. Actually, I think probably for the last 5 years, I've been looking at Salat and what it means. And obviously, that Brother Gans has done a lot of extensive work on this word as well. And he's come to the conclusion that Salat means duty. And I agree with him that Salat does mean duty. Um, I just think that there's a nuance to this salat in the sense that when the Quran uses this salat in a generic manner, where the Quran says, uphold the salat and give the zakat or render the purity, um, in that instance, the Quran is talking about the salat, the duty for the remembrance of God, to uphold the duty. This is what it means. If you think back to the first instance where Musa encountered God, God commanded him to uphold the salat for his remembrance. So God was commanding him to uphold the duty for his remembrance. That is, it was a prayer. Now, that's not to say that I mean the prayer in the sense that the Muslims perform the prayer, because the way the Muslims perform the prayer is that they face the stone idol Kaaba, which is a stone idol, and they have a specific format. And as you know, the Quran does not contain any specific format and does not contain any sort of ritual. Obviously, there is the command to perform ablution to wash yourself. I agree with that, but you won't find any sort of structure to this prayer of remembrance, which means that it leaves it up to you, and the content of this prayer. Again, is left up to you. There are many prayers in the Quran. There's many invocations, many glorifications and praisings and remembrances of God, and you can find most of them compiled here now in the book. Chapter 18, prayers from the Quran, has all these invocations and prayer and glorifications of God. So the idea is that you can use that when you stand up to do your salat for the remembrance of God. We also have the timings for the remembrances of God. This is the two ends of the day and the approaches of the night, and I think that's enough for someone who is sincere in implementing the commands of God. So this is my understanding of it. Now, obviously, the salat means duty, and the primary duty of the believer, the generic duty of the believer, is remembrance of God, but doesn't mean that this is the only duty of the believer. There's other duties that are incumbent upon the believer as well, such as reading the Quran or feeding the needy or taking care of your parents, etc., etc. You can find all that in the Quran if you look for this word. So this is my understanding after many, many years of thinking about Salat and what it means, and it's very close to what Brother Gans has come up with, and I give him full credit for this and many other ideas that he has presented, which I have put in my book. And really, the goal of the book was always to provide a context, to give an introduction to the Quran alone movement and our doctrine and philosophy, and why we consider the Quran to be God's word, and why we consider it to be preserved and complete and fully detailed, and why the religion of Islam is a false religion, has nothing to do with the Quran. And I do encourage people to go and look into Brother Gan's work. I mean, I've always done that, and I will continue to support him because I think he's done an amazing job. But I do understand a lot of people don't have the capabilities, language barriers, or they might not have the time, or they might not have the understanding that's required to, fully appreciate his work. So this book was in part an effort to condense the material and simplify it and make it more accessible to the layman. Someone who has no idea about the religion of Islam, they can approach this work and understand, and then they can move on to a deeper understanding of the Quran. So I think I was successful in that regard. The book is in really good shape now, and you can download it for free and give it to your friends. Print it out, give it to your friends, and really think about the arguments in the book, and use this book as a sort of a stepping stone to further your understanding of the Quran. And really, the goal of the book is to get people to start thinking about the day of judgment, about the reality of this life, and that it's fleeting, and that we are all going to God. That it puts that the Quran itself is a message from the Creator to put fear in men's hearts, and to look forward to the day of judgment. And this was always the goal of my service to God, was to call men to God and to be a witness over them, as it says in the Quran that Muhammad is a messenger, is a witness over you, so that you might be witnesses over mankind. So this was the whole intention of writing this book, and it's done now. So I do encourage you to read it, and yeah, that's it. God willing, until next time, peace and blessings be upon you.